I didn't know what to do, so I started lying. And I just, and I made up this story, and I said, well, on the way down here on the bus, this guy tried to kidnap me. And a man, you know, and I just totally invented this story, and I did such a good job of it that what happened was, for the entire year of seeing Dr. Brewster, I lied my way through 50 minutes a week, 5 days a week. I made up stories. And it was then, at that point, because I left him after a year, we moved from Cleveland to California, I realized that I was a storyteller. And that's how I learned to be a storyteller, by talking to Dr. William F. Brewster. So to wherever you are, Dr. Brewster, thank you for teaching me how to tell stories. So here's a story, and this story is called Chuck and Judy. And it's a little bit heavy, so I hope if there are any squeamish girls in front, I hope it won't bother you. Judy sat in her kitchen and stared into her cup of coffee. It was too black. She poured some more cremora into it. On the table in front of her sat the LA Times. She glanced through the Metro section. Unpleasant stuff, car crashes, crimes of every imaginable sort. Nevertheless, Judy always turned to this section first. After draining her cup of coffee, Judy lit up a smoke. She French inhaled, though she wasn't aware of this. She'd been doing it ever since high school. Somehow this made her feel younger, not so conscious of the years slipping by. The morning paper lay on the table. Judy quickly read through a story about two 14-year-old girls who'd been murdered the previous day. The girls had been tortured before they were finally killed. Nipple clamps, ice picks in the brain, the whole bit. A bullet to the head had finished each one of them off. A shudder went through Judy's body as she imagined how it would have felt to watch herself die. Then she let it go. Underneath the story was a photograph of a man who'd been arrested. Judy looked at it for a long while. The man looked so, well, normal.
Don't scratch.
How horrible, Judy thought, absently puffing on her cig. Still, she found herself unable to stop staring at the photograph. The caption said that the man's name was Charles Bagley, Jr. Somehow she thought the name was perfect. Judy got up and absently began doing last night's dishes. As she scoured the crock pot, she felt something dull inside of her skull, a kind of a pulling thing. I must be depressed, she thought to herself. Better be careful. Don't let it get to you. Judy's thoughts wandered back to the murder of the two girls. So much violence out there. But it wasn't just the violence. Death seemed to be lurking everywhere, darkly about the edges of everything. Just yesterday morning, Emma, her next-door neighbor, told Judy that she'd been diagnosed with bone cancer. 6 months, that's what they gave me, Emma said, laughed bitterly. Then she went home to pack lunch for her kids. After Emma had gone, Judy choked down bitter tears. But she knew that she really wasn't crying for Emma. No, she was crying more for herself and her own sad little life. Actually, for the fear of her own death. Judy pictured Emma wasting away. Then she pictured herself wasting away. Now the tears really began to come. They felt dark brown. For some reason, Judy drifted off to a scene from her childhood. She would have been perhaps 11 or so. In her room, she'd had an aquarium. It was supposed to be for tropical fish, but Judy has hers stocked with goldfish instead. The goldfish looked so pretty, she thought. She could sit and watch them for hours, swimming around, making those curious little O things with their mouths. Judy recalled how she'd stare into the cool blue of the tank for hours, her mind drifting off to the sound of the pump. Her thoughts would go pop, pop, pop inside her head, just like the bubbles in the tank. Oh, how Judy loved her aquarium. One of the things she liked best was to leave on the light at night. It was so comforting, that light. Sometimes she even imagined that she were one of the fish swimming around in there. Ah, what a life that would be. After a bit, Judy drifted off into a long-forgotten memory. One day she'd come home from school, and she'd gone in to look at her fish. But as soon as she got into her room, she knew something was wrong. Judy looked inside the tank. There it was. A snail had gotten hold of one of the goldfish and was eating it. The fish was sticking halfway out of the snail's mouth. It was trying to wriggle free, but the snail had swallowed too much of it already. Judy wanted to reach in and pull the fish out of the snail's mouth, but for some reason she didn't. She just sat there sat there on the edge of the bed, watching the fish being consumed. Judy continued to watch. For some strange reason, she felt a stirring in her loins. The fish continued to disappear. It seemed very non-committal about the whole thing. Soon the tip of the fish's head disappeared inside the snail. After the snail had swallowed the fish, it just sat there attached to the aquarium wall. Judy watched the snail for a bit. Then she put her hand into the tank. Slowly, she peeled the snail off the wall. It didn't want to come off, but Judy kept on pulling. After she'd removed the snail, she sat there holding it in her hand. The next second, she put the snail on the floor. Then she stomped on it with her thick heel of her shoe. There was a loud popping sound as the snail's insides shot out against the wall. Funny, Judy thought. She could still hear that popping sound. Still feel the snail underfoot, 28 years later. As she thought back on this incident, Judy's hand traveled down to her crotch. To her surprise, she found she was wet. The morning mail clunked inside the front door mailbox. Judy sat and looked at it and spread it out on the kitchen table. Junk. Judy chucked the pile aside and lit another smoke. She felt blank. I feel so tired, she thought. That was Judy's problem. She just felt so tired lately. She used to enjoy just sitting around in her bathrobe, maybe just watching TV, but lately she'd lost interest even in that. Joni, Judy's daughter, had suggested that she see a psychiatrist. It's silly, Judy told her. I just need a hobby, something to keep me busy. But Joni had insisted. So, Judy had driven to Brentwood, where she entered a neat red brick building. Inside, she sat in the waiting room of someone named Dr. Slutsky. Across from Judy sat a woman who was fiddling with her hands. The woman kept wringing her hands and picking away frantically at her skin. Judy watched the woman, but the woman didn't look back at her. She just kept picking away. Judy continued to watch. The woman kept looking at the floor, wringing her hands and picking at her skin. Judy could tell that the woman must have been pretty at one time, but now she'd gone all soft. The features of her face seemed to have melted into one another. Nothing looked very distinct. The effect was very disquieting. She's finished, Judy thought to herself. Somehow, thinking this made her feel better. The door opened. In the doorway stood a tall, lean man. Judy didn't really take in the man's face. She just noticed that he was wearing a pair of rumpled brown slacks and a yellow button-down shirt. There were flecks of gray at his temples. Perfect, Judy thought to herself. Mrs. Danch, the man said. Judy looked up. Won't you come in? Once inside the office, the doctor asked Judy to sit down. She noticed that his voice was very kind and gentle. Listening to it made her feel kind of safe and drowsy. During her allotted 50 minutes, Judy talked about lots of things. She talked about the year since her husband's death. She talked about her problems with Joni. She talked about the agoraphobia and the panic attacks that had kept her trapped inside the house. She talked and talked and talked. Judy didn't mind talking. She kind of liked it, actually. It was as if she were telling a story about someone else. Nothing of it touched her. Judy noticed the doctor looking at his watch. At the same time, she found herself wondering what he'd be like in bed. We'll have to stop now, the doctor said. Still that same quiet tone. Judy noticed that he didn't look at her when he spoke. She hoped he hadn't picked up on the little sexual fantasy she'd indulged in, but no, how could he? As she got to the door, the doctor handed her a slip of paper. Lamictal, he said. It'll help the depression. You might feel a slight dryness of the mouth, perhaps some dizziness, but it'll pass in a couple of days. Judy thanked him and left. As she walked down the hallway, she enjoyed the feel of her heels on the soft pile carpeting. By the second day, the medication had begun to take effect. The fear was still there, but the edges of it had softened somewhat. Also, when she slept, Judy didn't feel like she was going to fall down that horrible black hole anymore. Nor was she waking up in the middle of the night with the cold sweats. Things just felt somehow lighter, maybe softer. Somehow the texture of everything seemed to have the feel of Velveeta cheese. Still, nothing interested her. Judy noticed it as she was leafing through the morning paper. None of it was related to her. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and lit her cigarette, letting the smoke drift up her nostrils. She thought about going next door to talk to Emma, but right now she wasn't in the mood. Finally, she got up and sat on the couch, flipping the TV around until she finally settled on The Price is Right. Judy watched the people on the TV show. Everyone looked unreal to her. All those people jumping up and down like a bunch of stupid chimpanzees just because they'd won some stupid prize. The world is crazy, she thought. Completely crazy. The next second, Judy fell fast asleep. Something jolted Judy awake. A hand on her shoulder. Judy looked up to find a man standing over her. The first thought that came into her mind was that it was her husband, but no, it couldn't be. Her husband was dead. Judy looked up at the man. She thought she should be afraid, but somehow she wasn't. It was then that she saw the shiny kitchen knife in the man's hand. Judy watched curiously as the man slowly raised his hand and held it high over his head. Oddly, she made no effort to do anything. The man held the knife like that for another moment. Then he plunged it down, sinking it deeply into the bone just above Judy's sternum. She put her hand up to ward off the blow, but the knife simply cut through it like butter. She felt something hot and spurting, and then everything went red. The man raised his hand again and brought the knife down. This time it punctured her throat. Again and again the man brought the knife down. It was odd. Judy still felt detached. All she could think was, "My God, I'm being killed. This is absurd." Judy tried to make some noise now, but no sound came out of her mouth, just a sort of a croak. She watched in fascination as the crimson ran down her arms. Judy's life was draining from her body. She knew this, and yet she did not know. The whole thing was very peculiar. Now the man stood up over her. Though her vision was growing hazy, Judy got a good look at him by now. Yes, he did look like her husband. The square set of the shoulders, the strong jaw. He's kind of pretty, Judy thought to herself. Just as he thought this, the man looked down at her. He had a strange look on his face. Judy thought he looked almost sad. As she was losing consciousness, Judy thought about her life. She didn't think any particular thing about it. She just thought of it all together. It was kind of a blob of some kind, a shape, or maybe even the sound of a shape. She could feel it, but she didn't know what it was, this life that was draining out of her. Everything was hazy now. The man was looking down at her with a curious, childlike expression on his face. My God, Judy thought, he's standing there just watching me die. Still, even as she thought this, she had an odd feeling, almost like she wanted to comfort him. The edges of things were melting into one another now. Judy knew it was finishing. She whispered something, but only a gurgling sound came out of her mouth. She tried once more. Finally, the man leaned his ear down close to her mouth. What's your name? Judy said. The man looked down at her unblinking. He seemed to be thinking hard. Still, he said nothing. Judy reached up and tugged at the man's collar. She was desperate now, really desperate. Your name, she croaked. Now the man leaned close to Judy. He put his mouth up to her ear, and then he whispered something. He whispered it in a tone so gently and soft that a great peace came over her and wrapped itself around her like a father's loving arms. It's Chuck, the man said. My name is Chuck.